The system never called her a prisoner. It called her a line of code with a signature. The words echoed softly through the cold glass corridors of the interstellar registry hub as Ethan Walker stepped inside, his boots slowing just for a moment as the air itself seemed to carry a weight he couldn't quite name. The building wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was worse. It was quiet in the way things are quiet when everything has already been decided. Screens floated in midair listing classifications, assets, transfers, and custody confirmations, each one glowing with calm efficiency. Ethan adjusted the strap of his utility bag, the kind used by independent logistics contractors who moved between colonies without asking too many questions or staying too long in one place. He had been hired for a transport assignment. Nothing more, a standard transfer of secured biological cargo between jurisdiction zones, 5 days outbound, 6 days return, all expenses covered, no emotional engagement required. That was always in the contract, as if emotions were something that could be switched off like a maintenance light. Ahead of him, behind a transparent barrier of reinforced energy glass, stood Xenoryth Vela. She was still, not restrained in chains or devices, because none were needed. Her designation was already embedded in the system, her identity translated into ownership records that followed her like an invisible tether no physical lock could replace. Her silver-tinted skin reflected the soft blue glow of the registry lights, and her eyes remained forward, not searching for help, not pleading, simply observing as if she had already learned that observation was safer than hope. A staff officer approached Ethan with a tablet floating inches above his palm, reciting terms in a practiced tone that suggested he had repeated them thousands of times before. Temporary custody transfer confirmed. Asset remains under state classification. Responsibilities include preservation of condition and timely delivery to reassignment zone. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He looked past the officer, past the tablet, and at Xenoryth. For a brief moment their eyes met, not as owner and asset, not as contractor and cargo, but as two individuals who both understood something was fundamentally wrong even if only one of them had the authority to say it out loud. Xenoryth spoke first, her voice calm, almost detached, but not empty. "You don't look like the others who come here," she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly, his expression unreadable. "And what do the others look like?" he asked. "Like they've already decided I'm not a person," she replied without hesitation. The answer lingered between them longer than it should have, filling the sterile air with something the system could not catalog. Ethan finally accepted the tablet, not because he agreed, but because refusing would not change what the document already was. A signature appeared, and with it, the system acknowledged transfer completion with a soft chime that felt almost celebratory. The glass barrier slid open silently, and Xenoryth was guided forward not by force, but by instruction embedded in protocol. Ethan stepped aside instinctively, not leading her, not touching her, simply making space as if space itself could correct something the law had failed to see. As they moved toward the transport corridor, Xenoryth glanced at him again. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Ethan looked forward at the long corridor of departure gates, each one leading away from certainty and deeper into systems that didn't question themselves. He tightened his grip on the strap of his bag and answered quietly, "You get where you're assigned." A pause followed, heavy but not hostile. Then Xenoryth said, almost to herself, "That sounds like a long way from being free." Ethan didn't respond immediately, but something in his expression shifted ever so slightly, as if a thought had begun forming that he didn't yet have permission to finish. The transport bay doors ahead opened with a low mechanical breath, revealing the vessel that would carry them into motion, into distance, into whatever came next. And for the first time since entering the registry, Ethan Walker did not look at the schedule. The transport corridor sealed behind them with a soft mechanical sigh that felt almost too calm for what it represented. And Ethan Walker stepped into the narrow passage leading toward the departure vessel without changing his pace, though his attention remained quietly split between the path ahead and the presence walking beside him. Xenoryth Vela moved with controlled precision, not hesitant, not rushed, simply following the programmed route, as if she had learned long ago that resistance was not measured in movement, but in endurance. The corridor lighting shifted from institutional white to a cooler gray tone as they approached the docking threshold, where a mid-sized logistics vessel waited with its cargo bay doors open like a patient mouth. Ethan glanced at the manifest display embedded into the wall as they passed, watching lines of classification data scroll past with sterile efficiency, each entry confirming status, transfer rights, and compliance authorization as if identity itself had been reduced to a series of approvals. Saris noticed his gaze drifting to the screens and spoke without turning her head, her voice steady but quieter than before. "They make it look so organized," she said. Ethan responded after a brief pause, his tone neutral but not dismissive. "Organization is what systems use when they do not want to question themselves." That answer seemed to settle in her thoughts without immediate reaction, and for a moment only their footsteps and the distant hum of docking machinery filled the space between them. When they reached the vessel entrance, a ramp extended with a smooth hydraulic motion, revealing the interior lit in functional amber tones designed for cargo inspection rather than comfort. Ethan stepped first, not as an act of authority, but as routine familiarity, scanning the interior out of habit formed through years of independent transport work across unstable routes. The cargo bay was mostly empty, configured with modular restraint fields that were currently inactive, their soft blue outlines hovering faintly along the walls like suggestions rather than threats. Saris paused at the threshold, her eyes moving across the interior with a controlled stillness that carried more meaning than words, and then she asked, "If I enter, does that mean I accept what I am?" Ethan stopped, turning slightly so he could see her without fully facing her. His expression remained composed, but there was a subtle hesitation before he answered. "Entering a room does not define what you are," he said. "It only defines where you are standing." The answer did not resolve her uncertainty, but it changed the shape of it, as if it had shifted from something absolute into something she could examine rather than endure. She stepped onto the ramp, and the vessel acknowledged boarding with a quiet chime that triggered internal systems to life, lighting panels adjusting, air circulation stabilizing, and navigation protocols initializing in the background. Ethan followed her inside, moving toward the control interface near the front of the cargo bay, where he placed his bag down and initiated pre-departure checks with practiced efficiency. Saris remained near the center of the bay, not restrained, not guided, simply positioned by design. She looked around again and spoke, softer this time. "Do you believe people become what the system says they are?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He reviewed the flight clearance data, watching authorization stamps confirm route integrity and jurisdiction approval. Only after the systems finished their sequence did he respond, his voice quieter than before. "Systems are built by people who want certainty," he said. "Certainty is not the same as truth." A faint shift passed through Saris's expression, not quite relief, not quite disbelief, but something closer to the recognition that uncertainty might still exist where she had been told there was none. The cargo bay doors began to close with a slow descent of reinforced panels, sealing out the registry facility and its silent classifications. As the exterior light narrowed into a thin line and then disappeared completely, the interior lighting adjusted again, casting both of them into a controlled environment designed for transit rather than judgment. Ethan activated the vessel's departure sequence, and the engines responded with a low, steady rise in vibration that spread gently through the floor beneath them. Saris looked toward the sealed doors and then back to Ethan. "After this," she asked, "where do I go?" Ethan kept his focus on the control panel for a moment longer, as if verifying that the system itself would not change its answer. Then he spoke without looking at her directly. "You go where the route ends," he said. A pause followed, filled only by the quiet hum of power distribution stabilizing. "And after that," Saris asked, "what happens?" Ethan finally turned slightly, meeting her gaze with a calm that carried no certainty beyond the present moment. "After that," he said, "we figure out what comes next." The vessel disengaged from the dock with a smooth motion, drifting away from the registry hub as the docking lights faded behind them, leaving only the forward path illuminated and unmarked. The vessel moved through controlled space with a steady rhythm that felt almost like breathing, each cycle of the engines creating a low vibration that passed through the metal floor and into the soles of Ethan Walker's boots as he stood at the navigation interface reviewing the projected route. Outside the forward viewport, space was not dramatic or chaotic. but calm in a way that made distance feel heavier than motion, as if the absence of sound itself carried weight. Saris Vela remained in the center of the cargo bay, not confined, not instructed, simply present within a space that had been designed to transport classified assets across interstellar lanes without interruption. The system had already confirmed her status as transferred cargo, yet inside the vessel there was no visible sign of what that classification was supposed to mean in human terms. Ethan adjusted the trajectory alignment, watching the coordinates stabilize toward a mid-route relay station scheduled roughly 18 hours ahead at standard cruising velocity. He did not turn immediately when Sarah spoke, as if he was still deciding whether conversation was part of the job or something that existed outside of it. "This place is quieter than the registry," she said. Ethan finally looked up from the console, his expression unchanged but attentive. "Most places are quieter than the registry," he replied. Sarah studied the interior again, her gaze moving along the inactive restraint field emitters embedded in the walls. "Are those for me?" she asked. "Or for something that is supposed to happen to me later?" Ethan followed her glance, then answered with measured honesty. "They are for compliance scenarios that are no longer active," he said. "Right now they are just hardware waiting for instructions that will not be issued." That explanation did not fully satisfy her, but it seemed to shift the way she interpreted the space, as if uncertainty had replaced expectation. She walked a few steps for the first time since boarding, slow and deliberate, testing the distance available to her without restriction. Ethan returned to the console, initiating a secondary diagnostic scan of the vessel systems, confirming that no remote overrides or registry tracking beacons were actively engaging beyond standard protocol. After a moment, Sarah spoke again, her tone quieter. "You speak about systems as if they are separate from people," she said. Ethan paused before responding, his eyes still on the data stream. "Systems are just patterns people agree to follow," he said. "Sometimes those patterns outgrow the reason they were created." Sarah stopped near the center of the bay, processing his words with a stillness that suggested she was not used to language that did not define her through classification. "Then why follow them at all?" she asked. Ethan finally turned fully toward her, leaning slightly against the edge of the console. "Because leaving them is not always a choice you are given at the start," he said. A long silence followed, filled only by the distant hum of navigation adjustments as the vessel corrected its course through minor gravitational drift. Saris lowered her gaze briefly, not in defeat, but in thought. "I was told there was nothing outside my designation," she said. Ethan nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something he had heard many times before in different forms. "That is what systems say when they want to stop questions," he replied. The ship's internal lighting shifted subtly as it transitioned into long-range cruise mode, dimming the cargo bay into a softer tone designed to conserve energy. During sustained travel, Saris sat down slowly on the edge of a secured storage platform, not because she was instructed to, but because standing no longer felt necessary. Ethan observed this without comment, then returned his attention to the navigation panel, where the next relay checkpoint flickered into confirmation. After a while, Saris asked, "If I am not what they said I am, then what am I supposed to be instead?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He considered the question not as data, but as something that did not fit cleanly into any operational category he had ever been trained to process. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but lower than before. "You are still here," he said. "That usually means there is more to define later." Saris looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether that answer was avoidance or truth. Outside the vessel, the stars continued their silent drift, indifferent to classification, ownership, or designations that attempted to reduce motion into meaning. Inside, the cargo bay remained quiet, but it was no longer the kind of quiet that felt final. It was the kind that existed before something changed direction. The vessel maintained its steady trajectory through interstellar space, but something subtle had changed in the way the interior felt, as if the distance between 2 points inside the cargo bay had begun to matter more than the distance being traveled outside. Ethan Walker stood near the navigation console reviewing a routine systems check, his attention divided between projected coordinates and the quiet presence behind him. Saris Vela remained seated on the storage platform, but her posture had shifted slightly since the previous cycle, no longer rigid in the way of someone simply enduring circumstances, but less closed off than before, as if the environment had begun to register as temporary rather than final. The ship's internal lighting adjusted automatically as it entered a stabilized cruise corridor, reducing energy output and casting a softer, muted tone across the metal surfaces. Ethan confirmed the relay sequence ahead, a standard waypoint station located approximately 12 hours away at current velocity, designed for logistics verification and system refuel authorization. He exhaled slowly, then leaned against the console for a moment without interacting with the controls. Saris noticed the pause. "You are not always watching the systems," she said. Ethan turned his head slightly, acknowledging the observation. "Most of the time the systems are watching themselves," he replied. "I am just here in case they forget how." That answer carried no humor, but it was not cold either, and Saris seemed to consider it carefully before responding. "Back at the registry," she said, "everything watched everything else, but nothing ever saw me." Ethan did not immediately respond, his gaze drifting briefly toward the cargo bay wall, where inactive containment fields still glowed faintly as dormant geometry rather than function. "That is how most large systems work," he said after a moment. "They are designed to recognize categories, not individuals." Saris looked down at her hands, flexing them slowly as if testing whether they still belonged to her in any meaningful sense outside classification. "If I am not a category anymore," she asked quietly, "what am I in your system?" Ethan pushed off the console and walked a few steps closer, not invading her space, but reducing the distance enough that conversation no longer felt like it had to travel through the entire room. "You are not in my system," he said. "You are on my transport manifest, which is different." Saris raised her eyes slightly. "Is that supposed to make it better?" Ethan considered that with unusual care, as if the question required more precision than he usually allowed himself. "No," he said honestly. "It is supposed to make it accurate." A brief silence followed, during which the vessel's engine hum shifted into a lower frequency as it adjusted to microgravity fluctuations along the route. Saris stood from the storage platform and took a few steps along the cargo bay floor, not constrained, not directed, simply moving within the limits of the space. She stopped near a sealed equipment locker and traced her fingers lightly along the edge without activating it. "The registry taught me that accuracy is what removes uncertainty," she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. "Sometimes accuracy only tells you how precise the mistake is," he replied. Saris turned to face him fully for the first time since boarding. "Then what removes uncertainty?" she asked. Ethan looked toward the forward viewport, where distant stars drifted slowly across a black field that offered no immediate answers, only continuity. "Time usually does," he said. "And sometimes choice, if you are allowed to make one." The word choice lingered between them longer than the others, as if it did not fully belong inside the cargo bay's vocabulary. Saris stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "I was not allowed many of those," she said. Ethan nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition. "Most people are not," he said. "They just do not always notice it early enough to question it." The vessel emitted a soft notification chime indicating a routine course correction had been completed successfully, and the lights shifted again, slightly warmer, signaling the transition into long-duration travel mode. Ethan returned to the console and initiated a secondary scan of external traffic lanes, confirming no pursuit signals or registry tracking interference. Saris watched him work for a moment, then spoke again, her voice lower than before. "If I am not property, and I am not a category, then what am I supposed to do while I wait for whatever comes next?" Ethan paused, then answered without turning around. "You do what everyone else does," he said. "You stay alive long enough to find out." The simplicity of the statement seemed to settle into the space more deeply than anything before it, not as reassurance, but as a neutral fact that did not require permission to exist. Saris lowered her gaze slightly, then looked back toward the quiet interior of the ship, as if seeing it differently than she had before. Outside, the vessel continued forward through uninterrupted space, carrying both cargo and conversation into a direction that had not yet been defined by any system already willing to name it. The vessel entered a slower drift pattern as it approached the outer perimeter of a mid-route relay station, a structure that appeared on the forward display as a geometric cluster of docking arms and communication towers suspended in space, like a carefully assembled framework of order. Ethan Walker stood at the navigation console reviewing the approach sequence, his eyes moving across layers of procedural confirmations that populated the interface one after another with precise timing. Saris Vela remained within the cargo bay, now standing near the center again, not because she was instructed to move, but because she had begun to understand that movement itself did not always require permission inside this space. The ambient lighting shifted to a brighter tone as external proximity sensors activated, indicating that the vessel was now within standard identification range of the relay station. Ethan initiated the automated docking protocol, and a calm synthetic voice confirmed the request for transit verification. For a moment, the only sound inside the vessel was the subtle modulation of engines adjusting thrust alignment. Saris looked toward the forward direction of travel and then back at Ethan. "Every place we go has another system waiting," she said. Ethan did not turn immediately, his hands resting lightly on the console as data streams updated in real time. "That is how routes work," he replied. "One system hands you to the next until you are where you are scheduled to be." Saris considered that quietly before speaking again. "And if you are not scheduled," she asked, "do you just stop existing between them?" Ethan finally turned his head slightly, his expression unchanged but more attentive than before. "No," he said. "You just become harder to locate in the schedule." The vessel aligned with the docking corridor, and external clamps extended with mechanical precision, guiding the ship into a controlled interface bay where registry verification would take place. Ethan watched the alignment indicators stabilize, then initiated final approach clearance. The cargo bay lights adjusted again, preparing for external system scanning. Saris noticed the change and stepped slightly closer to the forward section of the vessel, though still maintaining distance from Ethan. "When they scan me," she said, "what will they see?" Ethan paused for a fraction of a moment longer than usual. "They will see what they always see," he replied. "A classification, a status, and a set of instructions attached to your record." Saris lowered her gaze briefly. "And what do you see?" she asked. Ethan did not answer immediately. The vessel connected with the docking interface, and a soft vibration passed through the hull as mechanical locks engaged. External station systems began their handshake sequence, and a structured series of verification requests appeared on Ethan's console. He reviewed them without urgency, then spoke quietly. "I see a person who has not been asked the right questions yet," he said. The answer lingered in the cargo bay as the docking sequence completed. A confirmation tone echoed through the vessel, followed by an external communication request initiated by the relay station. Ethan accepted the channel, and a neutral administrative voice began reading standard compliance checks, listing cargo identification protocols and custody validation procedures. As the automated voice continued, Saris stood still, listening not to the words themselves, but to the pattern they formed, as if she were trying to understand how something so structured could still feel so incomplete. Ethan maintained focus on the interface, responding to verification prompts with measured precision, confirming transport authorization and route integrity. When the system requested cargo status confirmation, there was a brief pause before Ethan responded. "Cargo is present," he said. The system acknowledged and proceeded to the next verification layer, but Saris noticed something in the phrasing that did not fully align with how she had been experiencing the last several cycles inside the vessel. After the transmission ended, silence returned, deeper now due to the proximity of the station. Ethan leaned slightly back from the console and exhaled slowly, as if releasing the weight of procedural attention. Saris spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "They never asked me anything," she said. Ethan looked toward her, then toward the inactive cargo bay interface panels. "They usually do not," he replied. "That is not how classification systems are designed." Saris took a slow step forward, stopping just short of the console area. "If no one asks," she said, "then how does anything ever change?" Ethan held her gaze for a moment, then glanced toward the docking interface where external lights indicated full station integration. "It changes when someone decides the answers are not complete," he said. The vessel remained steady within the docking bay, held in place by systems that treated it as both arrival and continuation of a longer process. Inside, For the first time since leaving the registry, the silence did not feel like absence. It felt like a pause that might still allow something different to begin. The docking clamps released with a controlled mechanical precision that echoed through the hull as a low, steady vibration, and the vessel remained suspended within the relay station's internal bay, like an object temporarily held in decision rather than motion. Ethan Walker stood at the navigation console, watching the external interface confirm full station integration, his eyes tracking procedural updates as they shifted from transit status to inspection readiness. Outside the forward viewport, the relay station appeared larger now, its structural arms extending in slow rotational alignment as automated systems prepared for cargo verification and route authorization continuation. Saris Vela stood a few steps behind him within the cargo bay, no longer fixed in one position, her movement now subtle and intentional, as if she was beginning to understand that space itself did not always dictate meaning. The ambient lighting inside the vessel shifted again, signaling internal transition from travel mode to inspection mode, and Ethan initiated a systems lock to maintain vessel stability during external scanning procedures. A soft notification confirmed that station interface connection was active and awaiting manual confirmation. He reviewed the incoming request sequence without urgency, then entered authorization clearance with steady precision. Saris watched him work for a moment before speaking. "This place decides if we continue or stop," she said. Ethan did not look away from the console. "It decides if paperwork agrees with motion," he replied. "We still continue either way." That statement lingered in the air between them, not as reassurance, but as description of something neither fully controlled nor fully dependent on permission. The relay station responded with a structured verification request, and Ethan accepted the external communication channel. A neutral administrative voice filled the vessel, requesting confirmation of cargo integrity, custody status, and route compliance validation. Ethan answered each prompt with concise clarity, maintaining standard protocol language that matched the system's expectations without deviation. Saris listened closely, not to the technical content, but to the way her existence was being translated into procedural terms that never once asked her directly what she was. When the verification sequence paused briefly, she stepped closer to the forward section of the cargo bay, her gaze fixed on the interface displays as if searching for something that might not be visible in data form. "They are still talking about me like I am not here," she said quietly. Ethan completed the final confirmation input, then leaned slightly away from the console. "They are talking about records," he said. "Records do not usually respond." Saris turned her head slightly toward him. "Do you think records are wrong?" Ethan considered the question, then answered without hesitation. "Records are not designed to be right or wrong," he said. "They are designed to be consistent." The relay station's systems completed their inspection handshake, and a brief confirmation tone indicated successful validation of transit status. External docking indicators shifted from inspection mode back to temporary holding mode, signaling that the vessel was cleared to remain within the bay while awaiting final route authorization release. Inside the cargo bay, the change was subtle, but noticeable in the way tension that had not been acknowledged seemed to ease slightly. Ethan reviewed the updated clearance window on the console, noting an extension of permitted station presence by several hours due to routine scheduling overlap. He did not react outwardly, but adjusted internal planning accordingly. Saris sat again on the edge of the storage platform, this time not as retreat but as choice, her posture more relaxed than before. After a long silence, she spoke. "If they never ask me questions," she said, "how do they know what I am?" Ethan glanced briefly toward her, then back to the console, where system logs continued to update in real time. "They do not know," he replied. "They assume based on what they are given." Saris absorbed that answer slowly, as if it shifted something fundamental in the way she had previously understood the structure around her existence. "And what were you given," she asked, "when you saw me?" Ethan paused longer than before, not because of hesitation, but because precision mattered more in this moment than efficiency. "A designation," he said, "in a situation that did not fully match it." The cargo bay remained quiet, the only sound coming from distant station systems cycling through their operational loops outside the vessel. Saris looked down for a moment, then spoke again, her voice steady but less guarded. "If what they gave you is incomplete," she said. What do you do with it? Ethan finally turned fully toward her. The lighting inside the bay softened slightly as station systems entered maintenance calibration mode, creating a calmer visual field across the interior. You do not accept it as final, he said. You treat it as information, not truth. Saris looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging a concept that had not existed in her experience before this journey. Outside, the relay station continued its silent rotation through space, indifferent to classification changes or internal realizations, while inside the vessel, the space between definition and understanding had begun to narrow into something neither system nor registry had yet accounted for. The relay station's presence outside the vessel grew more active as automated systems continued cycling through secondary verification layers and the docking bay around them, shifted with subtle mechanical movements that indicated the station was preparing for either extended holding or release, depending on pending authorization results. Inside the cargo bay, Ethan Walker stood near the navigation console reviewing updated clearance logs, his attention steady and methodical as new system messages appeared confirming temporary station integration status. The vessel itself remained stable, locked into position by external clamps that held it within a controlled field of motionless precision, as if even the concept of drifting had been paused. Saris Vela stood several feet behind him, no longer confined to a single position within the space, her movements now measured and deliberate, reflecting a gradual adjustment to the idea that her presence was not continuously dictated by external instruction. The lighting within the cargo bay remained in maintenance calibration mode, softer than transit lighting, creating a subdued environment that made every sound and movement feel more distinct. Ethan finalized a sequence of internal checks, then leaned slightly away from the console as the system confirmed successful synchronization with the relay station network. A brief silence followed, filled only by the low operational hum of the vessel maintaining equilibrium within the docking field. Saris broke that silence first. Something is happening outside, she said. Ethan glanced toward the diagnostic display, which showed external station activity increasing in volume and frequency. Routine escalation, he replied. They are preparing for extended verification due to incomplete registry overlap in your classification history. Saris processed that answer without immediate response, then stepped closer to the forward viewing area where faint structural movement from the relay station could be seen through the reinforced viewport. They still think I am incomplete, she said quietly. Ethan did not deny it. Instead, he adjusted a secondary monitoring feed that displayed external communication requests being queued through station authority channels. They think in terms of completed records, he said. Anything outside that category gets treated as unresolved status. Saris turned slightly toward him. And what do you think I am? She asked. Ethan paused, his attention shifting from system data to her presence in the room, as if recalibrating the weight of the question. I think you are someone inside a system that has not finished defining you, he said. The relay station issued a new external signal, this time higher priority, indicating that additional administrative review had been initiated due to inconsistencies flagged in custody classification logs. Ethan reviewed the incoming request, noting that station oversight protocols were now requesting clarification on cargo designation integrity. He did not react with urgency, but with measured focus, entering a response sequence that maintained compliance while preserving ambiguity and classification detail. Saris watched him work, then spoke again. If they decide I belong to them again, she said, does what you said still matter? Ethan completed the transmission and then turned fully toward her. The cargo bay lighting shifted slightly as station systems adjusted to internal thermal regulation cycles, casting a steadier tone across the space. What I said is not dependent on their decision, he replied. It only depends on whether it remains true in the space we are in. Saris stood still for a moment, as if testing that concept against everything she had previously been told. Outside, the relay station structures continued slow rotational movement, and a new set of docking indicators activated, suggesting that external review teams were preparing for possible direct interface communication. Inside the vessel, Ethan initiated a restricted channel lock to prevent automatic override of internal control systems during external inquiry. The action triggered a soft confirmation tone, signaling successful isolation from non-essential external command access. Saris noticed the shift in system behavior. "You are blocking them," she said. Ethan nodded once. "I am limiting what they can assume without asking directly," he said. A pause followed, longer than before, during which neither movement nor sound inside the cargo bay changed. Then Saris spoke in a lower tone. "If they come inside," she said, "what happens to me?" Ethan looked at the sealed cargo bay doors for a moment, then back at her. His response was steady, without escalation or alarm. "Then they will have to deal with what is actually here," he said. The vessel remained locked within the station field, but for the first time since docking, the balance of control inside the cargo bay felt less defined by external systems and more by the decisions being made within it. The relay station's internal systems shifted again, and this time the change was not subtle, as multiple external authorization signals converged on the vessel with a level of priority that indicated direct administrative intervention rather than routine verification. Ethan Walker stood at the navigation console, watching the incoming transmission stack build layer by layer, each request marked with higher clearance levels than the previous, until the display filled with structured demands for immediate compliance review. The cargo bay remained sealed and stable, but the atmosphere inside it felt different, as if the boundary between internal space and external authority had become thinner even without physical change. Saris Vela stood near the forward section of the bay, her attention fixed on Ethan rather than the shifting lights outside, as if she had begun to understand that whatever happened next would not be decided by systems alone. A new communication request bypassed standard routing filters and appeared directly on Ethan's console, labeled as Relay Station Governance Override Protocol. He did not accept it immediately. Instead, he initiated a secondary isolation sequence, reinforcing the vessel's internal control boundary and limiting external command injection to non-critical channels only. The system acknowledged the restriction with a brief warning indicator, but compliance protocols remained intact within legal operational boundaries. Saris spoke quietly, her voice steady but carrying a tension that had not been present earlier. "They are not just checking anymore," she said. Ethan kept his focus on the interface, reading the updated transmission headers. "No," he replied. "They are trying to re-establish authority over classification control." Another signal arrived, this one accompanied by a direct request for physical inspection access authorization, indicating that external personnel were being prepared for potential entry into the vessel. Ethan reviewed the access request and did not approve it. Instead, he initiated a conditional response protocol requiring explicit internal consent override for any physical interface with cargo bay contents. The system paused briefly, processing the denial, then returned with an escalated confirmation demand. Saris stepped closer to the center of the cargo bay, not out of instruction, but as if proximity to Ethan had become the only stable reference point in the environment. "If they come in," she asked again, more controlled this time, "what will they do with me?" Ethan did not answer immediately. The console reflected layers of incoming authority signatures, each one attempting to assert procedural dominance over the vessel's current classification status. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but firm. "They will try to return you to what their records say you are," he said. A silence followed, deeper than before, because it was no longer passive but filled with incoming intent. The relay station initiated docking bay internal access preparation, and external corridor lights began shifting toward inspection mode, indicating that physical interface teams were being assembled. Ethan activated a full internal system lock on the cargo bay, sealing all non-essential access points and redirecting external communication through a controlled single-channel interface. The vessel acknowledged the configuration with a stable confirmation tone, but immediately flagged the action as non-standard operational behavior under registry protocol. Saris watched the changes unfold across the control panels, then spoke again. "You are going against them," she said. Ethan looked at her briefly. "I am preventing them from deciding without seeing what is actually here," he replied. The external system responded with a final escalation request, marked as mandatory compliance verification requiring immediate response or forced override authorization. Ethan studied the request for a long moment, then slowly disengaged the automated compliance pathway entirely, replacing it with a manual authentication layer that required in-person justification from external authority representatives. The system hesitated, processing the unusual configuration, then locked into a waiting state. Saris moved one step closer. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Ethan turned fully toward her now, the cargo bay lighting reflecting softly across both of them as the vessel held steady inside the relay station. "Because systems only keep working the way they do when no one interrupts the assumptions they are built on," he said. Another pause followed, and then Saris spoke again, her voice lower but clearer. "Then what happens now?" Ethan looked at the sealed cargo bay doors where external movement could be faintly detected through station sensor overlays. "Now," he said, "they have to ask questions they are not prepared for." The relay station's internal channel opened again, this time not as a command, but as a request for clarification from higher authority observers who had arrived to resolve the escalation. Ethan accepted the channel, and for the first time, the system no longer described Saris Vela as a fixed classification awaiting transport resolution, but as a status requiring active confirmation from both registry and present testimony. Inside the cargo bay, silence settled differently than before, not as waiting, but as the moment just before a definition changes shape. The relay station's internal silence changed again, but this time it was not calm or procedural, it was deliberate, as if multiple layers of authority were converging on a single point inside the vessel and trying to decide what reality should be enforced. Ethan Walker stood at the navigation console, his hands resting lightly near the interface as he watched the incoming high-level transmission stabilize into a structured observation channel rather than a command feed. The cargo bay behind him felt different now, not because anything had physically changed, but because the space itself had become the focus of external attention that no longer treated it as routine cargo classification. Saris Vela stood still in the center of the bay, her posture calm but fully aware, as if she could sense that whatever came next would not be about movement or travel, but about definition. The relay station authority channel opened fully, and a new voice entered the vessel, not automated this time, but layered with human procedural oversight verification, requesting direct confirmation of custody status and classification validity. Ethan did not respond immediately. He reviewed the full request stack, noting that multiple registry branches were now cross-referencing Saris Vela's designation simultaneously, each attempting to reconcile her status with conflicting historical entries that no longer aligned cleanly with current records. The system was no longer simply asking where she was going, it was asking what she was. Saris looked toward Ethan before speaking, her voice steady, but carrying something that had not been present earlier cycles. "They are going to decide what I am again," she said. Ethan finally turned from the console, his expression unchanged but focused. "They are going to attempt it," he replied. "Whether they succeed depends on what is confirmed here." The external channel transmitted a formal request for immediate reclassification authorization, stating that unresolved asset identity required resolution under jurisdictional correction protocol. Ethan reviewed the request, then initiated a manual override for direct response input, bypassing automated classification templates. The relay station paused, as if processing an unexpected deviation in procedural structure. Sarah stepped slightly closer, her eyes fixed on Ethan now rather than the system displays. "If they say I belong to them again," she asked, "does anything you did before still matter?" Ethan held the console steady for a moment, then answered without hesitation. "It matters because it already happened," he said. "Systems cannot erase sequence, only reinterpret it." The external authority channel attempted a second escalation, introducing a senior registry observer layer requesting vessel compliance for direct inspection authorization. Ethan did not allow the escalation to proceed automatically. Instead, he redirected the request into a conditional review state, requiring physical presence acknowledgement from both parties inside the vessel before any classification adjustment could be approved. The system flagged the configuration as highly irregular but remained within legal operational boundaries, leaving the decision unresolved rather than overridden. Outside the vessel, movement could be detected through sensor overlays as relay station personnel prepared for interface entry procedures, their presence now acknowledged but not yet executed. Inside the cargo bay, Saris remained still for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "You are risking a lot," she said. Ethan looked toward the sealed cargo bay doors where external signals pulsed in controlled intervals. "Risk is not the important variable," he replied. "Accuracy is." Saris seemed to process that, then slowly shifted her gaze toward the same direction he was watching. "What if they still refuse to see me as anything else?" she asked. Ethan took a slow breath, then stepped slightly away from the console, positioning himself between her and the interface as if that distinction mattered more than protocol. "Then they will have to explain why their definition requires ignoring what is already in front of them," he said. A new signal arrived, indicating that external authority representatives had reached the final access threshold and were requesting entry authorization into the cargo bay under full oversight conditions. Ethan reviewed the request one last time, then opened a controlled channel. The vessel confirmed readiness for interface dialogue, but not for automatic transfer of classification authority. The cargo bay remained sealed. The system remained active, and for the first time since leaving the registry hub, the decision of what Saris Vela was did not belong to a database waiting to be updated, but to a moment that could no longer be resolved without someone choosing what truth would remain after the system stopped speaking.